John was a software engineer who spent most of his days in front of his computer screen, writing and debugging code. He lived in a small apartment on the 14th floor of a high-rise building in the heart of the city. He enjoyed the view from his bedroom window, which overlooked the bustling streets below. But one night, everything changed. John was sitting at his desk, working on a particularly difficult problem when he heard a strange sound outside his window. It was a soft tapping noise, almost like someone was knocking on the glass. He looked up and saw nothing but darkness beyond the pane. He shrugged it off as his imagination and went back to his work. A few minutes later, he heard the tapping again. This time, it was more insistent, like someone was trying to get his attention. He stood up and walked to the window, peering out into the darkness. That's when he saw it, a grinning face staring back at him. The face was pale and distorted, its eyes bulging and its grin impossibly wide. It seemed to be floating in the darkness, hovering just outside his window. John stumbled back in shock, knocking over his chair and scrambling to his feet. He blinked, thinking maybe it was a trick of the light or his tired eyes playing tricks on him, but the face was still there when he opened his eyes. As he stared in horror, the face slowly drifted away from the window, disappearing into the night. John was left alone, trembling with fear and confusion. He tried to rationalize what he had seen, but there was no explanation for what he had just witnessed. For the rest of the night, John was unable to sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that grinning face staring back at him, haunting him. He tried to shake it off and go about his day, but he couldn't help but feel like he was being watched, like the face was always there, lurking in the shadows. Days turned into weeks, and the memory of the grinning face began to fade. John had convinced himself that it was just a trick of the light or his tired mind playing tricks on him. But one night, as he was getting ready for bed, he noticed something strange on the window pane. It was a message, written in what looked like blood. "Hello, John. I'm still here." John's heart raced as he stared at the message, his mind racing with fear and confusion. Who was doing this? What did they want from him? He tried to scrape the message off the window, but it wouldn't budge. It was like it was etched into the glass. The grinning face returned that night, hovering outside John's window once again. This time, it was joined by a chorus of other faces, all grinning and leering at him from the darkness. John felt like he was losing his mind, like he was trapped in a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. As the weeks went on, the faces became more and more aggressive. They would tap on the glass, whisper John's name, and even try to break through the window. John tried to ignore them, tried to convince himself that they weren't real, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that they were always there, waiting for him. One night, as John was sitting at his computer, he felt a cold breeze brush against his neck. He turned around, expecting to see one of the faces, but there was nothing there. He turned back to his computer screen, but something was off. The code he had been working on was different. It was like someone had been editing it while he wasn't looking. That's when John realized the faces weren't just in his mind. They were real, and they were trying to communicate with him through his work. He tried to shut down his computer and leave the apartment, but the door wouldn't budge. He was trapped, with nowhere to go but face the horrors that were lurking in the darkness. The faces continued to taunt and torment him, their grinning mouths twisted into grotesque, inhuman shapes. John felt like he was going insane, like he was losing touch with reality. But then, something strange happened. One of the faces spoke to him, in a voice that sounded like 1,000 whispers all at once. "John, we need your help. We are trapped in this world, unable to move on to the next. We need you to help us find a way out." John was terrified, but he felt a strange sense of obligation. He knew that he was the only one who could help these lost souls find peace. He went back to his computer, and with shaking hands, began to write the code that would release the faces from their eternal prison. It took hours, but finally, John had done it. He had written the code that would free the faces from their torment. He hit the run button, and waited. At first, nothing happened. But then, he heard a sound like 1,000 sighs of relief. The faces began to fade away, one by one, until they were gone. John collapsed onto the floor, exhausted and overwhelmed by the experience. He didn't know what had just happened, but he knew that it had changed him forever. He was no longer just a software engineer, trapped in his own little world. He was a hero, a savior, someone who had done something truly amazing. From that day on, John never saw the faces again. But he knew that they were out there, somewhere, waiting for him. And he knew that he would always be ready to help them, whenever they needed him. Because he was no longer just John, the software engineer. He was John, the hero of the lost souls, the one who had faced the darkness and emerged victorious.